All right, so this is a bit of a different one, but this is my good friend's 2012 Chevy Sonic LTZ, and it's a manual and it's a turbo. So this is exciting, right? Let's take a look at this. Finished in beautiful orange. I don't know what this is called. And this is the owner right here. He's the GOAT. Comes with the car. If you ever buy this car, he's included. And we got the Opel designed LUV, and if you look really closely, you gotta look really hard, but somewhere down there's a turbo. Can't really hear it with the stock airbox, but yeah, this ought to be fun. This gauge cluster kind of reminds me of a motorcycle. Yeah, it does look like actually a motorcycle gauge cluster. No temperature gauge for some reason. But they feature the tachometer, which is the most prominent part of the car. So that's what you're always looking at. You don't even care about the speedometer. Just look at the tach. Clutch is actually pretty good weight. It's not too light, not too heavy. For hot hatch, it's a really good weight. And the shifter is actually really easy to shift, but I would say that it's weird because the first gear is really short and then the second gear is like really tall, so it feels like you have to kind of immediately shift to second, but second is too tall to you can't really start in second without toasting your clutch in this car. So it feels like you're kind of jumping in between first and second. But I mean, the shifter itself is really easy to shift. The car just wants to go in gear by itself. It feels like it just pops into gear. There's no resistance to go into gear, which is really nice if you're commuting. And this is actually probably a really good commuter car. You know, it's pretty roomy in the front and the back, and it's actually a modern car that doesn't weigh a lot. This car weighs like what, 2,500 pounds? So one, you get, even though you have a turbo inline 4, what is it, 1.4 liter, you still get crazy MPG, and this is all just city, and that's him driving. So you could probably get this thing to 40 if you really try. And with that 6th gear, you can, like, I mean, the gearing is really tall even if it's a tiny engine, so you could be doing 70 barely turning this 1.4 liter inline 4, which is probably why you can get 40 mpg in this thing. Honestly, you don't even want to go into 6th gear when you're just driving around town because it feels like you're gonna lug the engine. But this is a world car, which is what this car was made for. Almost every market, and it was tweaked a bit for each market, but generally speaking, this car was used all across the world. In the US it's called the Sonic, but in most of the rest of the world it's called the Aveo. And this car is assembled in almost, you know, every continent. It has a factory in Michigan, a factory in China, a factory in South Korea, a factory in, I believe there's one in Europe, I think, but almost a factory in every single continent, which is really what cements this car as a world car. And I think GM did a great job developing this. They kind of, you know, they suited it to many different markets, and it's just a really good subcompact. Even for the US, this thing is, you know, it's large enough to be drivable on American roads, do 70, 80 on American highways, but it's small enough to where you're getting 40 miles a gallon, not even sweating it, and it's still fun to drive. This car is still lightweight, and in 2012, 2013, that's when cars were actually starting to get really heavy. So this is a nice change to see a fairly modern car that weighs as much as the 90s subcompacts and does almost drive like a 90s subcompact, except for I guess the electronic throttle, which you can feel if you're used to driving 90s cars. But you have all the creature comforts you would probably want, or at least I would want. Even heated seats, which is a big ticket option. And you have the fuel economy of a subcompact, and you have a manual transmission, which makes the car 10 times better. Come on. You cannot say that, oh, I own the automatic of a Chevy Sonic. It's just unfortunate if you do. I'm sorry. But this car weighs nothing, and thus it handles like a true hot hatch, right? You can take this car on these roads and have plenty of fun, and it doesn't wallow like a Chevy Cruze, like a Chevy Impala. This drives like a true hot hatch does, except for maybe the suspension's a little soft, but that's so you can daily this car and not have backaches. And you know, the gearing does make it a little tough, but you can still whip this car into corners. Oh man, that turbo lag too. But you can, I mean, it's fun, especially for a modern car, because in my old brain, modern doesn't equal fun, but this proves me wrong. And this car is fuel efficient, and because it's a world car, you could live in any part of the world and parts are dirt cheap, relatively speaking, right? I mean, when you compare this to Ford Pro parts, this is dirt cheap. And look, GM, you know, they proved that we can make a small car. We can, you know, compete with the Japanese at making a good, efficient, small car that can be used in the entire world. And actually, I was in Jordan, in the Middle East, and there are a lot of these, and people love the crap out of these things because they're easy to drive, they're fuel efficient, they have manual transmissions, and you know, they're just good all-around cars. And the back seat is roomy too for how small this car is. So yeah, I mean, and this one has the Turbo 4, which honestly most Sonics probably have the anemic 1.8, but this has the 1.4 turbo, which it likes to rev more than the 1.8, and it's a lot more fun to just have a turbo, just have that non-linear throttle response.
It's also more reliable engine, apparently.
Apparently the turbo is more reliable. You can put 87 in this. GM somehow managed to get a turbo engine that you could put 87 in.
Yeah.
And this thing does like to rev, unlike the 1.8. I heard the 1.8 is sluggish, but this thing wants to rev.
You can rev it without much vibration from the engine.
And
like
yeah, it is a very smooth engine too. Well balanced. Of course, you know, modern cars, they've gotten rid of that rattle that the 90s cars have, where you feel like, you know, you feel like your entire teeth are gonna fall out from the engine. Whereas, you know, this, you hear the engine and you feel the acceleration, but you don't exactly feel the vibration from it, which with, you know, I don't know what they're doing with, you know, sound deadening, maybe motor mounts. I don't know how they're getting 4 cylinders to be this smooth, but they found a way to do it.
Small engines like to rev.
It's, yeah, I mean, when you have a 1.4 liter engine, you're not I mean, you're not exactly in a Kawasaki Ninja here, but you're still revving it. You know, for a newer car, it likes to rev. This is not like a Dodge Grand Caravan where you floor it and it doesn't want to go past 4,000 RPMs, and it's happy to rev. Kind of like a K series almost. It just wants to rev.
BBT.
And you don't have to rev it to keep going, because you do have, you know, the turbo is tiny, so it spools really low, and so it helps you get up to speed. I mean, I'm not even getting close to red line, and I'm getting up to speed fairly quickly here. So what?
Oh, it's really fast.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting up there. And so it's definitely, you know, peppy for a car that gets 40 mpg on the highway. It's definitely peppy. and that's why we like the turbo.
Yeah, apparently 06 is on the high or mid 8s.
High or mid 8s.
Yes.
Which for a subcompact hatchback, come on.
Yeah.
And these cars weren't, you know, you weren't shelling out more than 24K for these cars, maybe. Brand new, less than that with all the options. So GM, you did a good job. I don't say that very often. I don't say GM, you did a good job.
Speakers suck.
Okay, OEM speakers are garbage.
And this one has the suited up 4 speakers instead of the 2 that the LT model comes
Yeah,
with.
the base model.
Yeah, and it still sucks. I don't know what they did.
Okay, so GM, you got to get your paper speakers out of here.
I don't know what they did.
I don't know who's
maybe
designing. Maybe it's a Daewoo thing. Yeah. Oh, did I mention Daewoo? Did I mention Daewoo? Okay, so engine from an Opel, right? An Opel German engine. Chassis co-designed by Daewoo, apparently. I mean, the Aveo that this replaced, well, it was called the Aveo in the United States. It's still called, this exact car, if any other country, it would be called an Aveo. Sonic. Let's call it the Sonic. Maybe more youths will buy it if we call it the Sonic. But the Aveo was almost all Daewoo, whereas this is a lot, you know, it's still manufactured in Michigan if you buy it in the US. Obviously, if you buy it in other countries, it's built in other places. But this is, you know, textbook world car. Let's take this car and let's make it work in as many countries as possible. And that's what GM succeeded in doing.
He might want to close his door.
Yeah, that Kia Cadenza. Kia Cadenza's door isn't shut.
Yeah, that's some new gen shit.
New gen?
That's some new gen shit.
But yeah, what can I say? Fun car to drive. Suspension's a little soft, but that's okay. That's okay for you know, for a commuter car. It's perfect. I'm sorry, I'm not a fan of the gauge cluster, okay? I want a temperature gauge. I want an oil pressure gauge. I want to see... no boost gauge either. Come on, guys. Like, at least add a boost gauge.
They have... Apparently, the turbo housing has a place for a boost gauge sensor.
Well, yeah, you could just put it into your manifold and have a boost gauge, but...
They already have a pre-made hole for it.
So, yeah, guys, come on. I mean, maybe it was when it was in an Opel, it would have a boost gauge, but... I mean, you know, maybe the average Chevy Sonic buyer...
Modding this car is really cheap.
That is true. That's advantages of a world car, right? I mean, this isn't a Mitsubishi 3000 GT. You're not scouring the forums to find any parts. You're going on any parts website, boom, 100 in stock. I mean, it's too easy. And, you could be in freaking South Africa for all I care. There's probably parts for this car in South Africa. There's probably at least a couple thousand of these roaming around in South Africa, I guarantee it. And they built a lot of these things, man. Not so much in America, but in other countries. Because
Chevy Sparks too.
Chevy Sparks, which kind of looks similar to this car. They have that Sonic the Hedgehog styling.
Yeah.
But these, I think these were a cash cow for GM. And GM really, you know, they really, what's the word here? What am I looking for?
They made their money.
They hit the target with this one. Same thing with the Aveo, I mean, you know. But if you are in the market for these, by all means.
They're cheap.
They're cheap because
They're cheap.
they're not a Toyota, so Americans will assume, oh, it's a Chevrolet 4-cylinder, it's unreliable. I mean, maybe, you know, the reliability isn't like Toyota where you can drain the oil and drive it for a couple thousand miles with no oil, but I feel, I mean, this one has how many? 142, and it still runs like a top. I mean, this thing, I couldn't tell you it has 142,000 miles on it. You know, you tell me to get into this car and it feels, you know, it feels tight. Everything feels, you know, oh, that's really tight. Tighter than all my cars. And everything feels good in it. I mean,
the chassis is pretty solid too.
yeah, I mean, when you have a 2,500 pound hot hatch, there's not too much, I mean, really, the only thing that makes this feel like not a 90s hot hatch is the suspension, which, you know, you can get a cheap set of coilovers, pop it on this thing, and now your car friggin' breaks your back over speed bumps, but
handles like a champ.
And so, yeah, really get coilovers, and I don't know what you can do about this, but this is, to me, you know, I'm a fan of the tack, but this,
Not a lot.
please, GM, you're not, this isn't a motorcycle, this is a car, and this doesn't make the car look modern, I don't think, you know, and get us a temp gauge, get us an oil pressure gauge, and maybe, you know, I'd say I like it, but I don't know, this isn't a motorcycle, GM, so.
That's feel like a motorcycle gauge.
It feels, yeah, it feels like I'm looking at a gauge cluster from a Kawasaki Ninja, so I don't know, you know, what they were thinking with that, but maybe it would resonate with the youth that they were trying to appeal. I mean, you gotta think, this car was designed in 2012. Well, it initially released in 2012, so this was the Great Recession, and shit like this still kind of look cool. You know, if your car had like a digital display like this in 2012, it would be seen as modern. I can't say I'm a fan of it, but it gets the job done. It gets you your miles per gallon, and it tells you to shift up even though you're not even spinning 2,000 RPM. It wants you to shift to 6.
He always wants the best MPG.
Yeah, but
possible.
it seems a little far-fetched to ask me to shift to 6 gear when I'm spinning 1,800 RPM on a 1.4 liter 4-cylinder.
I wonder why they did that gauge, because everything else in the car is really old school mechanical type of
I mean,
thing.
well, because you gotta think this car was also offered an automatic, so.
Yeah, so probably we're trying to make it has CC to get into.
Yeah. But yeah, this is GM's attempt at a world car round 2, and they succeeded, and they built a pretty fun car while they were at it too. So yeah, 2012 Chevy Sonic LTZ Turbo. There you have it.
What's the next car?